discussed, what we read, I hope that won't be the only time you hear those readings, but I hope that after what I have to say and after we continue listening to the music today, you'll go back and reread some of those lessons because it's a beautiful lectionary that lifts up the message of Matthew. So we'll talk a little bit about kind of who he was and his gospel and why we should be so proud to belong to a church that bears his name. So let's start with a brief history. The Gospel of Matthew was written for second-generation followers, based on the memories of the first generation. The audience for Matthew's Gospel, therefore, was a group of Jewish Christian community. They were growing increasingly distant from other Jewish groups, and they were becoming more Gentile. So in Matthew's Gospel, we get some of the most profound teachings from Jesus, seeking to bridge Jew and Gentile, slave or free, male or female. Matthew's community was becoming increasingly divided. And it's from that history that we can turn to the primary lessons in Matthew's Gospel. Matthew places Jesus in this divisive culture, tracing his lineage to David and to Abraham. And this acknowledges Jesus as an authority by birth, even though he's coming from a more lowly household. In many ways, Matthew introduces us to a king whose kingdom is cosmically ordained. In Matthew's telling, Jesus calls for solidarity with the outcast, the poor, the marginalized, universal love embracing the whole human race. We read early on in Matthew's Beatitudes, "You have heard it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun rise on the evil and on the good, sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous." These are perhaps some of the most radical and political words we could hear, even by today's standards. Jesus in Matthew was hugely political, and not in our modern partisan terms, but in his concern for our collective human community. Jesus preaches more on how we should treat one another than anything else. Following Jesus meant aligning with a countercultural movement. And in Matthew, what's striking is how immediate the response is. In the story of calling his first disciples, we hear, as he walked by the Sea of Galilee, Jesus saw two brothers, Peter and Andrew. He called to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fish for people." Immediately, they left their nets and followed him. The same thing happens with James and John. Immediately, they followed him. And as we read today with Matthew, he stood up and followed him. Unlike other Gospels, Matthew's disciples respond without hesitation. This sense of urgency is itself a theological thread throughout the Gospel of Matthew. To immediately follow models a letting go of earthly attachments that bind us: livelihood, family, identity. They do not ask what their families might think or how it will look to their neighbors. Their hearts have been oriented to Jesus, oriented to love. It is different, it is unknown, yet they risk everything to find out. Who among us is willing to risk everything to find out what it's like when we love one another? When Matthew stood up to follow Jesus, he didn't know what it would look like. He didn't ask for a strategic plan or policies on an agenda. There is no waiting. Follow love for the sake of love, risking everything for love. This theological urgency also appears in how Matthew teaches about God's kingdom. Matthew sees the kingdom of heaven as a counter to the violence and structures of Roman rule. Even as Matthew offers apocalyptic imagery, which he is known for, he offers hope. There is a nonviolent, just, and merciful kingdom. And it is not far off. When we respond to the world around us with faithfulness, by living according to God's will, then we reveal the fullness of God's reign in eternal love right now. But when we respond by not taking actions as Jesus instructs, or living by our own will, we remain in fear, suffering, and violence. We are stuck in darkness individually and collectively, preventing us from entering God's reign right now. According to Matthew, we are called from any background, culture, or religion to the urgent work of relieving suffering, building right relationships, and embracing the whole human race. To follow Jesus in Matthew's gospel is to stand so strongly that we do not blow with the changes of cultural and political winds. We ground in love, and we will face discomfort and uncertainty to follow. Brene Brown, herself an Episcopalian, names her guiding values as faith and courage. She speaks about the importance of connecting with our values so that whatever happens, you ground in their orientation. Because as we've been talking about at St. Matthew's for the last year, it's not about the what, it's about the why. When there's a what question, what do you do? We have our why to guide us. As Brene says, when she lives in alignment with her values, it's not always easy. She says, choosing to do what I believe is right and choosing to be brave over being comfortable. So do we stand in our why, in our values? Matthew, without hesitation, stepped into uncertainty and discomfort, facing sneers as he chose to follow Jesus. Matthew did what Brene Brown calls operationalizing your values. Not just saying, I believe in love, but acting in ways that bring love to life. Brene gives an example of when her values guided her. She was working with an organization, and the principal people kept stepping in and out of their meeting. So grounding in her faith, respecting her own dignity, and her courage, she was able to set a boundary and courageously tell them that it was disrespectful of her time and they could not leave during meetings anymore. It may seem small, but that changes how we are treating one another. Two of my orienting values are love and belonging. I hold these so much that I will meet any stranger because I believe they are beloved and I want them to know belonging. It's hard. My natural inclination is towards shyness, but I will face discomfort to stay true to my values. Even working in hospitality for a decade and meeting hundreds of people a day, I was very sweaty every day. And when I came away, having heard someone's story or made a new friend, I knew I was dealing in love eternal. When we align with our values, we feel it. Content, at peace, secure in our strength. I feel a kind of humble joy, a softening of my heart that acknowledges I've stayed true to who I am, to what I value. When we do not align, we feel that too. Regret, resentment, insecurity. Because belonging is so important to me, I know that when I have contributed to someone not feeling belonging, it's a pang of regret, a heaviness in my heart. And this is why St. Matthew and his message are still so relevant for us today, and why we should feel empowered belonging to a church called St. Matthew's. Crises, movements, policies, and politicians, they will come and go. It's about your response based on your groundedness, without certainty of what the outcome will be. Knowing that we may not solve wars, I don't think I'm in a position to do that. But just taking the next best step and making it a step oriented toward Jesus. In the face of urgency, just like we see in Matthew's gospel, the immediacy of every small act, if aligned with Jesus' instructions and your values, can set in motion the change the world needs. So can you articulate your why or your values? Could you narrow it down to 2 or 3? I've actually put a list, just one list in each pew that are from Brene Brown's list of values that she and her team use, just to inspire you to think about this. Because being able to ground in something, you kind of need to know what it is. So our faith guides us. But based on your individual life, there may be nuances to that are important to pay attention to. We don't just get together on Sundays for a great coffee hour. But we come to reorient our lives towards Jesus' way of love. We come to a place where we share our baptismal values. And we are committed to following Christ. We know that we will not always get it right. We know the disciples, just like Matthew, stumbled a lot. But we need to come back for renewal again and again and again. I will be praying in community on Sundays for the rest of my life. Not because it's the most comfortable place to be all the time, but because I become stronger, I become braver, I become more resolute in my own discipleship. Just like Matthew, immediately, urgently, be willing to take the next loving step. For the sake of love, risk everything